Ethan woke to the hum of sprinklers and the faint chatter of morning birds outside his window. The neighborhood of Willow Creek was always quiet this time of day, the kind of silence that came from strict HOA rules and retirees who took their lawns as seriously as religion. He stretched, poured himself a mug of coffee, and headed for the front door to enjoy the crisp morning air, only to feel the handle resist under his grip. He frowned, twisting again. The door moved an inch, then hit something solid. Confused, he set his coffee on the hallway table and pushed harder. Still no luck. He peered through the small glass panel near the knob, and his breath caught in disbelief. A line of enormous ceramic planters, each filled with manicured shrubs, stood shoulder to shoulder across his front stoop, like soldiers in formation. The barricade was so tight, the door couldn't open more than a few inches. A paper was taped crookedly across the glass, notice of violation written in thick red ink. Ethan blinked twice, as if maybe sleep was still clinging to his vision. He opened the door again as far as it would go, enough to stick his arm out and rip the paper free. Violation of HOA regulation #12. Exterior color must conform to approved palette, eggshell white. Immediate corrective action required. Noncompliance will result in enforcement. Below the typed words was a signature. Karen McMillan, HOA President. Ethan groaned and shoved his hand through the narrow gap to push one of the planters aside. It didn't budge. It was filled to the brim with soil and rocks. "You've got to be kidding me," he muttered. He leaned his head out through the crack and looked across the street. There she was. Karen McMillan, Queen of the cul-de-sac, stood proudly on her porch in her pink jogging outfit, holding a clipboard like a royal scepter. She looked like she'd been waiting for this exact moment. "Karen," Ethan shouted, his voice echoing down the street. "What the hell is this?" Karen's head turned, her lips curving into that syrupy smile she wore whenever she thought she was being civil. "Good morning, Ethan," she called back cheerily. "I see you received your notice." "Yeah, I did," he said, trying to wedge his body sideways through the narrow opening. "Mind explaining why you turned my front porch into a damn hedge maze?" Karen's smile tightened. "You were given 2 written warnings about your door color. The community design guidelines specify eggshell white. Yours is ivory mist. That's a clear violation." Ethan stared at her, incredulous. "You blocked my door because of a shade of white. Rules are rules," she said, shrugging like she was quoting scripture. "You had ample time to repaint." "Karen, this is insane," Ethan said, his voice rising. "You can't just trap someone in their house." "Oh, please, don't be dramatic," she replied, waving a manicured hand. "You can use your garage like everyone else." Ethan spun around, walked down his hallway, and hit the garage button. The motor whirred, then stopped halfway. Something was stuck. He stepped outside through the back and walked around the side of the house to find a bright orange sticker plastered across the garage door. "Access suspended, HOA review pending." He stood there, jaw clenched, feeling a pulse of disbelief give way to anger. Karen watched from across the street, her arms crossed in self-satisfaction. "Next time," she said, calling out, "try reading the community handbook before making such bold aesthetic choices." Ethan marched back to the front of his house. "You do realize this is harassment, right?" "It's enforcement," she corrected smoothly, "and I'd appreciate if you didn't raise your voice. People are still sleeping." A neighbor, 2 houses down, peeked through their blinds, the slats trembling slightly before snapping shut. Another man jogging past slowed down, frowned at the potted barricade, then hurried on, pretending not to see. That was the Willow Creek way. Stay out of it, no matter how absurd it looked. Ethan took a deep breath. "Karen, move the planters now. I don't take orders from rule breakers," she said, flipping a page on her clipboard. "I have a board meeting in 30 minutes. If you'd like to file an appeal, you can attend next Tuesday's session at the clubhouse. Bring a copy of your compliance forms. If you ever decide to fill..." them out compliance forms, Ethan asked, laughing incredulously. You think this is North Korea or something? Karen gave a tight-lipped smile. Don't be ridiculous, Ethan. We just believe in maintaining community standards. That's what makes Willow Creek so desirable. Some of us care about property values. Ethan stepped closer to the barricade, close enough to see the smug glint in her eyes. You mean you care about control? That's what this is really about. Karen's eyes hardened, but she kept her tone sugary. If you're suggesting I have a personal motive, I'd advise you to watch your tone. Threatening an HOA officer is grounds for further disciplinary action. Threatening, Ethan repeated, incredulous. I'm the one locked in my own house. She gave a dismissive snort and started to turn away. Call the HOA helpline if you need clarification. They open at 9. Ethan watched her strut back toward her porch, clipboard swinging at her side. Every step she took seemed to hum with arrogance. He looked down at the planter's expensive, heavy, probably ordered just for this stunt. The absurdity of it all made him laugh once, bitterly. He turned, went inside, and grabbed his phone. His reflection in the glass showed a man on the edge of breaking. A good guy just trying to live in peace pushed one HOA notice too far. He'd moved here for quiet, for stability, for a community where people respected each other. Instead, he got a woman who thought power meant paperwork and petty tyranny. He scrolled through his contacts, his thumb hovering for a moment. All right, Karen, he muttered under his breath. You want to play games? Let's play. He dialed 911. The operator's calm voice answered. 911, what's your emergency? Hi, Ethan said, steady but firm. I'm being blocked from exiting my house by my Homeowners Association president. She's barricaded my door with large planters and suspended access to my garage. There was a pause on the other end. Sir, she's physically preventing you from leaving your property. Yes, ma'am. That's unlawful confinement. Officers will be dispatched to your address immediately. Please remain on the line if you feel unsafe. Ethan looked out through the narrow gap in the door again. Karen was now chatting with a neighbor, gesturing toward his house like she was the star of some suburban courtroom drama. He could almost hear her telling the story how she had no choice, how she was just enforcing the rules. Don't worry, he said quietly, watching her smug expression from the shadows of his doorway. You're about to learn what real rules look like. The sound of distant sirens began to echo faintly in the air, growing louder by the second. Karen turned, confused, her face paling just slightly. Ethan allowed himself the smallest smile, lifted his mug of now cold coffee, and whispered to himself, Justice is on the way. The distant wail of sirens broke through the quiet perfection of Willow Creek, growing louder until it became a hum of tension that rolled through the cul-de-sac. Curtains shifted. Garage doors cracked open just enough for curious eyes to peek through. The residents of this immaculate neighborhood didn't see police cars often, certainly not on a weekday morning. 2 patrol cars turned into the street, their red and blue lights reflecting off polished mailboxes and freshly washed SUV. Ethan stood at his front door, arms crossed, waiting. Across the street, Karen McMillan froze mid-conversation with her neighbor. Her expression flickered from confusion to alarm, then quickly rearranged itself into one of theatrical concern. By the time the first officer stepped out, she was already marching across her lawn in her pink jogging outfit, clipboard clutched like a badge of honor. Officers, she called, waving her arm. Thank goodness you're here. I was just about to call you myself. The taller of the 2 officers, a man with calm eyes and a measured tone, glanced at her. You're the one who called. Karen placed a hand on her chest. Oh, no, he did, she said, pointing dramatically toward Ethan. He's been verbally aggressive, defiant of HOA regulations, and I believe he may have threatened me. Ethan stepped out through the now partly cleared doorway. Threatened you? You barricaded me inside my own home. Karen turned sharply. Don't raise your voice, Ethan. The officers are here to help." She gave the officers a saccharine smile. "You see, there's been a misunderstanding. He refused to comply with color regulations, and we had to take enforcement action. I was well within my rights as HOA president." The shorter officer squinted at the row of planters blocking Ethan's stoop. "Ma'am, you put these here." Karen hesitated. "Technically, yes, but it's procedural. Our bylaws." The first officer interrupted, voice firm. "Ma'am, it doesn't matter what your bylaws say. You can't block someone's access to their home. That's trespassing and unlawful confinement." Karen's smile faltered. "That's absurd. He wasn't confined. He has a garage, doesn't he?" Ethan gestured to the bright orange sticker still plastered across his garage door. "She sealed it with an HOA violation tag." The second officer walked over, peeled back the corner of the sticker, and frowned. "Ma'am, you did this." Karen looked offended. "It's standard practice. The garage was under review pending compliance." "Compliance with what, exactly?" the officer asked, his patience thinning. "The paint," Karen said, as if explaining something obvious. "It's not eggshell white. It's ivory mist. The tones clash with the community aesthetic. If we let one person defy the standard, where does it end? Purple doors, neon fences." The officer blinked slowly. "So you blocked his exits because you didn't like his paint color." Karen opened her mouth, then closed it. "When you say it like that, it sounds, well, it sounds worse than it is. But I was enforcing regulations. We're a community of order, officers. Without rules, we'd have chaos, ma'am." The first officer said, stepping closer. "Blocking a homeowner's exits is chaos. You can't restrict someone's movement or tamper with their property." Ethan, arms crossed, allowed himself a quiet, satisfied exhale. Karen's perfect composure began to crack. A few neighbors emerged from their doorways now, pretending to check mail or water plants while they watched. One woman even held up her phone, clearly recording. Karen noticed the camera and stiffened. "Officers, this is all a misunderstanding. I'll remove the planters myself." "Good," the taller officer said, his tone still cool but carrying authority. "You'll do that now." Karen shifted awkwardly, glancing at the heavy pots. "Well, they're quite large. I might need some assistance. Perhaps Ethan could—" "No, ma'am," the officer interrupted. "You place them there, you'll move them, or we will, and you'll be billed for obstruction." Her mouth fell open in protest, but the officer had already turned to Ethan. "Sir, please step back while we clear your access." Karen sputtered. "You can't just move HOA property." The officer shot her a look sharp enough to cut glass. "This is private property, not HOA jurisdiction. You've overstepped, ma'am." With practiced efficiency, the officers began shifting the planters aside. One retrieved a small metal pry bar from the trunk, while the other used gloves to drag the heavy pots just enough to open the space. The grinding of ceramic against concrete filled the air. Karen's protests grew louder. "You're damaging them. Those planters cost hundreds of dollars. They're imported." "Then you shouldn't have used them to block a door," the officer said without looking up. Ethan leaned against the porch railing, watching her unravel. "You know, Karen," he said, voice calm, "if you just knocked and talked to me like a normal person, this wouldn't be happening." Her face flushed a deep red. "I tried diplomacy. You ignored my notices. I ignored your tantrums," Ethan replied. "There's a difference." One of the officers chuckled quietly but hid it with a cough. When the last planter was rolled aside, the front door opened fully for the first time in days. The morning air rushed in, carrying the smell of damp soil and freshly cut grass. The taller officer turned to Ethan. "Your access is restored, sir. You're free to come and go. We'll file an official report for property interference." Karen's voice rose in panic. "You can't file a report. This will go on my record. I was doing my duty." "Your duty doesn't include breaking the law," the officer said flatly. Karen folded her arms, trembling with indignation. "This is ridiculous. You're making me out to be some sort of criminal. I was protecting the integrity of Willow Creek." The officer raised an eyebrow. "By locking your neighbor inside his house." The neighbors who had gathered tried and failed to hide their laughter. A few turned away, pretending to tend to their gardens, shoulders shaking. Karen shot them glares sharp enough to cut glass, but it only made things worse. "I'll be contacting the HOA attorney," she declared, chin high. "This is not over. You're all overreacting. Feel free to do that," the officer said, handing her a slip of paper. "But you'll still be hearing from us. Interfering with someone's property is a civil offense. Don't let it happen again." Karen snatched the paper, her hand trembling. "This neighborhood used to have standards," she muttered. Ethan stepped forward, his tone even but edged with quiet satisfaction. "It still does, Karen. We just raised them." That made one of the officers grin. "Nice paint job, by the way," he added, nodding toward the front door. "Looks better than half the houses here." Ethan laughed, tension melting off his shoulders. "Thanks. It's ivory mist, apparently. A dangerous choice." Karen's door slammed across the street so hard that her welcome sign fell off and clattered on the porch. The officers exchanged a look, one of them shaking his head with an amused sigh. "Some people just can't handle authority," the shorter officer said quietly. Ethan smiled faintly. "Some people can't tell the difference between authority and ego." They shook hands before leaving, their squad cars rolling slowly down the street, the flashing lights fading into the distance. The neighbors retreated back to their perfect houses, whispering behind closed doors about what had just happened. Ethan lingered a while longer on his porch, taking in the silence that followed. The morning sun glowed against his freshly painted door, warm and soft. He picked up one of the overturned planters, brushed the dirt from its base, and set it neatly at the corner of the walkway, just to restore a bit of order. Then, with a smirk, he looked across the street at Karen's house. Her blinds were drawn tight, but he could almost feel her glaring through them. He lifted his mug, took a slow sip of cold coffee, and said under his breath, "Welcome to justice, Karen." Inside his home, the echo of freedom felt like peace. Outside, Willow Creek's perfect facade had cracked just a little, and Ethan couldn't help but think it looked better that way.